Good morning and many thanks for watching KTN News. My name is Dennis Aseto. Welcome to this edition of News Center. But today we are talking about food, climate change, and how best we can take care of that which we have. Now, climate change is a constant concern for governments and general public across the world as we strive to find solutions to this worrying trend. We produce more food, take care of what we have, and avoid wastage. What is our responsibility? In studio with me is Moses Nyoro, Director, Food Bank in Kenya, Caroline Maina, Program Director, Technos, Nekesa Wafula, Vice Chairperson, Soka, and Dr. Christopher Mutungi from the World Resource Institute as we have this conversation when it comes to matters to do with food, how best we take care of it and avoid wastage. And I will go straight to Chris on my immediate left. Now, why is food loss and waste such an important subject, but which never gets attention of policymakers like other issues?
Well, thank you very much for your question, Ateka. And I think before I answer your question, I really want to tell you a little bit about where we come from in terms of this problem. The World Resources Institute has been working in Kenya for the last 30 years in the area of, forest protection, landscape restoration. And recently we entered into the space of a resilient farming systems or transformation of food systems, and also energy space where we are dealing with energy access as well as climate action. Now, in 2017, these functions sort of solidified together under African leadership, and that formalized into what we now call as World Resources Institute Africa. So our vision is to have an inclusive transformation agenda so that, people, African people and landscapes coexist, benefit from one another, and they live with one another sustainably, so that we can have people benefiting from landscapes in terms of food, water, and also landscapes getting protected from the adverse effects of excessive resource extraction. So we are a research-based organization, and we use data. We capture that data, make sense of it, and develop solutions that benefit the people, that protect the planet, and that stabilize climate and create or build resilient communities. So coming to your question, with all that, food loss is not just a food security issue. It cuts across other domains of sustainability. It is a social issue, and I would say, in this case, it's actually a moral issue, because we lose so much food in a country that we barely have enough to feed our people. We have, in the recent past, we've had, almost 5 million people going without food, going to bed hungry. We have 1 in every 1 child, being undernourished, and that's a huge statistic. And so that is one angle to it. But looking at the social aspect, and you ask yourself, who is producing the food in the country? Very poor people. The youth are in towns. It's our fathers and mothers who are, yet we waste all the food. It doesn't make a lot of sense. On the climatic sphere, on the environmental sphere, then food loss and waste contributes almost 10% of greenhouse gas emissions. And recently we had this, caucus of everybody trying to talk about food loss and waste in Nairobi. Climate change in Nairobi. Food waste is actually contributing a significant part to that, and it is time that we address the issue, to deal with also the issue of climate change.
Let me just go to Nekesa as we have this conversation now. There is the question of food that we don't even have enough, but yet we waste a lot. And this is a subject matter that ought to be given the same attention as climate change and climate action, what we need to do to rectify this. But it does not get the attention that is required. Why is the problem? Where does the tape get cut when you're talking about the entire food security in our populations?
First of all, I would like to introduce my society.
Yes.
So I'm the Vice Chair of the Society of Crop Agribusiness Advisors of Kenya. And this is basically a society that brings together private sector, research, government officials in agriculture, that could come together for the good of the agricultural sector. And most of the times we do advocacy work around food security, issues around water, issues around good agricultural practices, and just ensuring that the farmers that we are working with or working for are getting what they need to meet the market needs. So back to your question, basically I think there's definitely a disconnect in different parts of, especially let's talk about the world, because this is an international event. So there's a disconnect between what people know at the household level and definitely maybe at the regional level. Because if you look at, for example, the information, the data we have across different countries about how much food is in each of our countries, it's very difficult to get this information. So most of the times, for example, I'll give the example of maize, for example, in Kenya, because that's a case scenario that is well known. You find that there's maize, but sometimes you find that in the market, there's no maize, but farmers claim they have maize. So where is this disconnect between what they have and what the government has as information? What is going on in between here? And then when the rains come or something happens in between, like there's an importation of, say, maize because there's no maize, there's a cry of the farmers that we have maize, it's going to get spoiled in the galleries. Why is there importation of maize? So I believe that there's a disconnect between what we have at the household level and the data that is there at the government. And probably there should be efforts that should be put in place to actually gather the correct information from farmers. And I know that government right now is pushing a lot to register farmers to get, so that they can get this information out and they can be able to circulate. Maybe the other thing is about the geographical distribution, where you find there's plenty in one region and another region doesn't have. So what happens? Definitely there's loss.
Moses, let me come to food banking. Now, she's talking in terms of data and the disconnect between the farmers and the government and how best to utilize all this information to make sense, because they say numbers don't lie. But how then do we consume this information so that it makes sense to the farmer, it makes sense to the government, it makes sense to the consumer, and that we also know how best to utilize what we have so that it is not wasted, and also so that every party is happy, because the farmers don't sell because they say the government prices are low. So how do we have this information to make sense to everybody?
Thank you so much for that question, Dennis. Actually, I would like to say that in adding on to what my colleagues here have said, Food Bank in Kenya came in as an intervention because of the food loss that has just been mentioned. So much food loss within the entire supply chain, all the way from farms to distributors to even consumption, because those people who have higher incomes, they sometimes buy more food that they need in their homes. Unfortunately, we've not been able to go into that area because you don't know how the food has been stored and whether it's contaminated or not. However, the information is spreading in terms of how we can make sure that we develop interlinks with the government, with the consumers, and even us who are involved in food recovery. Because Food Bank in Kenya is recovering food in all sectors. We're talking about from farmers, from exporters, that is at the pack houses. We are recovering food, even in the small scale farmers, where we actually send volunteers to do second harvest once they've done the first one, which they're trying to take to the market. And one of the things we have done is to increase sensitization. Meeting with government, that's where we're engaged also with the Ministry of Agriculture. We've had meetings with them so that we can see exactly how we can make sure that information is spreading, that people do not have to throw away food. They can actually channel it to organizations that are recovering the food, like Food Bank in Kenya, and then it can be taken, because we have data of the people who really need that food. We've collected a lot of data in that particular aspect of the people who really need that food, and we take it to them. And so we've been able to actually increase coverage. Like, for instance, monthly now, we are able to recover more than 60 tons of food that could have gone to waste. And we have targets to increase that particular quantity by a much, much bigger margin. And people are starting to understand that we've been called by people who have actually excess food to go and actually recover it so that they don't have to throw it into waste. As long as it's edible, it's food that can be consumed. So that information and networking, so that we can share information to make sure that everyone is aware that there's a lot of food loss. And like my brother there was saying, a lot of gas is being emitted to the atmosphere, especially from agriculture, where between 30 and 40% statistics show actually goes to waste every year. And so that element of connecting with stakeholders and networking to make sure that everyone is getting this information, and that people who are even consumers and they are very needy can also know that actually they can get food from somewhere. That in itself is starting to make a difference within our environment.
Let me come to Caroline Minor now. Let me just say what Technos is all about. Now, it is to harness the power of the private sector to benefit the world's poor. Now, how do we, like Chris just said earlier, it is the poor farmers who produce the food. You know, as in Nairobi, you'd say, we call home and say, nitumie mahindi. But now, as we have these conversations and the poor farmers out there, how do we turn their venture to be a business venture that makes profits to them, so that they sell at a profit, they sell to the government at rates that benefits them, and also we bring a conversation that farming is a business and a good business at that matter?
Thank you. So I'll first start off by introducing Technos. So we are a non-profit organization in over 30 countries globally. We are in different sectors. In Kenya, we came in 1973. And yes, you're right about our tagline there. And so this idea around food loss and waste, it starts off with so many people or players along the value chain. So there are numbers you've heard about climate and emissions. You've heard about wastage of 30 to 40%. But it comes to the question on what can we do, and everyone, for everyone in the planet and for the planet. And so questions that Technos has been addressing, especially around fruit and vegetables, has been previously in partnership with the Coca-Cola company, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, FCDO, and Rockefeller Foundation in the last 13 years or so, trying to reduce post-harvest losses along the chain. And this meant by getting mango itself into the Coca-Cola Minute Maid brand, and so local sourcing for local consumption or global consumption. Secondly, we also did items like around trying to reduce post-harvest losses and handling. And this is why you're asking, what can the smallholder farmer look at to ensure that we are able to produce correct produce for the consumer. So I'll give a case scenario. I am a consumer, maybe somewhere in Nairobi. I buy a mango. I cut it open, I find little maggots moving around it. Tomorrow, I have purchased that mango at, let's say, 20 shillings at my mama mboga. The question is, will I go and repeat another buy tomorrow? I won't, because I don't have another 20 shillings to lose. And I need that money to feed my family. And so the question starts here. Are the farmers producing the correct produce that have been taken care of to ensure that it can get a market? And so this is not only on mango, it can be in tomatoes, and it can be also in vegetables. Are we using the right chemicals? Are we using the right agronomical practices to ensure whatever we get to market first is good for the consumer to do a repeat buy? And so for me, talking to the farmer, I would say there's a market for any produce that is produced correctly, meeting the right parameters on agronomy. And then again, to the value chain actors, in Wakulima market, you will find a lot of our produce passes through Wakulima market. Before it gets to the consumer in your kibanda outside, you will find it has gone through so many multiple hands. That is another point of loss, where there are so many people who handle the produce before it gets to the consumer. So what can we do to ensure we have less hands handling the produce in a way that it can get directly from farm to the consumer. And then lastly, to the consumer. Imagine if in a glut, we were able to eat as much as possible. So currently, we produce around 1 metric tons of tomatoes annually. Around 309,000 metric tons, which is around 32% of what we produce goes to waste. So does it mean in the months of between July and September and January and February, do we eat more tomatoes? Do we make soups? What does it mean for us as a consumer to ensure that we still make a market for our farmers? And does it mean also that we, make more money for our farmers and also try and reduce loss? Not because for the farmer needs the money, but because we need this planet and the climate not to go to extreme losses.
Let me come back to you, Chris, now. We talk about tackling food wastage and losses, which is an important subject. But someone would say, I only go where I get value, like she says. Even the Hass avocados that we have right now has to go through certain measures for it to get to the international market. Do farmers know about this? Do they know what chemicals to use? Even the packaging, the harvesting, the movement, also fighting the middlemen and the cartels that do exist. So what is the role of government? What is your role as people in this space, and what is our role? And just how important is this subject and how urgent?
Well, that's a good question and a big one at that. First of all, let me start by saying this. One of the things that we are doing now, which we think is an innovative idea, is to work with large companies, large off-takers, so that we can leverage on their capacity and on their knowledge to reach out to smallholder farmers whom they work directly with. That way, if a company is supposed to be getting raw materials from a group of farmers, then they will either invest their knowledge or equipment or whatever else it is to make sure that they reduce the losses that are accrued by the farmers themselves. Something that you did know, and I want to mention it here, is that recently, food safety systems management or certification now will require companies not just to be certified in terms of safety or quality of products, but on policies and mechanisms that they have in order to reduce food loss and waste. They have to audit themselves. Companies that are exporting products like Brookside, for example, like Kakuzi, for example, beginning April next year, they have to audit their systems and ensure that they're actually reducing food loss and waste within their supply chain. So not within themselves, but also reaching out to the farmers that they work with. Now, that is one part of it, working with established companies. But very important also, it is time we changed the environment so that farmer associations or small and medium enterprises can enter into processing. We cannot just continue living on primary production and expect to reduce food loss and waste. It doesn't work. The last 8 months or so, we had a glut in some areas, but severe shortage in others. If we were able to process and package and store that, we would have dealt with that problem once and for all. Now, but it requires, appropriate policies for market interest and technology access.
Nekasa, he is talking about, this is a policy issue. Now, this one straight goes to our members of parliament, the leadership of this country, making sure that as much as the farmer is producing, they have a place where they're taking the produce for probably value addition. Because I remember a while back there was a cry in this country when a certain farm said they were importing their potatoes from Netherlands to come feed Kenyans. And I know even the government stepped in to make sure that our farmers who grow potatoes get to have that pie as well. Now, as we talk about policy and the government playing their role, what is your message to the government to start with? Because someone clearly is sleeping on the job.
I think they have the policy in place. The part that probably would be an issue is the implementation and the follow-up. Because if you look at how our country is structured, you find that in every county right now, if I'm not wrong, There are places where we are having like potato storage, you know, big potato storage. There's a company that is there to dry foods. But if you go there, the capacity is not actually, you know, they're not fully utilizing that. So what are we doing about the follow-up? Because I was just noting down about, you know, at the farmer level, there's a lot of wastage. Actually, that's where we have a problem. Because the problem, okay, that and the value chain, what Carol has mentioned, 13% loss at the farm level, 17% along the value chain. If you total that, that's around 30. So that is what is happening. How do we then, you know, address all these issues? There are storage for potatoes. Are we utilizing them? There's a factory in, I think, Nyandarua for drying, you know, foods. Are we drying those cabbages? I know cabbages during the peak season are given to even cows. You know, you can get it as even for free. When you go visiting a farmer, they even tell you, take cabbages and go with them. But are we utilizing the resources that we have? We have the infrastructure, but I think and the policies, very good policies, by the way, because they are utilized by other countries across Africa. But are we doing the implementation and follow-up? So for me, I think for to push the government is the implementation and the follow-up of what we have in place.
Nekesa says we have policies. It's just a question of implementation of the policies. But let me twist that a little bit. In our own homes, you buy, say, a gunia of waru, and you decide for the next 10 days, we are eating waru. So at some point, it overwhelms you. Or you cook a lot of waru that your entire family of, say, 5 cannot finish what you cooked for dinner. At that point, it is not just about loss at the farmer level. It is not the middleman. It is loss and wastage in our own homes, in the hotels, in places we go to eat. How do we cure that?
That's a very interesting question because, as I mentioned earlier, one of the most difficult things is to handle what happens in the homes. Because in the home, there are several challenges. There's no standard way that people actually store food in their homes. So once people have actually bought food in their homes, then of course, you leave them to use it at that particular point. However, as I mentioned earlier, we are increasing sensitization. And one of the ways we are saying is that there was a time we sent a message as Food Bank in Kenya, and we were saying that if you have surplus food in the home, because we also work with the public health inspectors, when we actually recover food, we check whether it is actually food that can be consumed. So if people have food in the home that they cannot use and they want to throw away, they can actually channel that food to us. And then we'll be able to take it to somebody who really needs that particular food. And so actually, we'll even ask the media to help us in the sensitization and actually to inform people they don't have to throw food in their homes, which they cannot consume, probably because it's too much. And by the way, this problem is more with the higher income people, not with the low income people, because those ones don't even have enough food to actually consume. So if we can actually increase information and sensitization that this food can actually be harnessed, it can actually be recovered, then it's going to be something that can help us to network even with consumers in the home to reduce loss at that particular level. Yes, probably we can also give information on how people can store food better. And so that by the time we are recovering it, then it's not contaminated in any way.
Caroline, I'll come to you on the same subject. Let's go to Makueni County. They have lots of mangoes. And the governor decided to put up a plant that will help process that so that we avoid wastage, because at times, how many mangoes does a mango tree give you at any given time? They get overwhelmed. But then how do we make sure that with your expertise, getting to the farmer, getting to the government, and even international partners, so that we take these processing facilities where they are needed, so that we avoid wastage, so that the farmer gets the money they need, so that there is also value addition. Our coffee doesn't have to go outside so that we buy processed coffee, we can process it ourselves. How do we have this conversation at the table so that it is a win-win situation for everyone?
Thanks. That's a very good question. First, Makueni did well by setting up a processing plant there. At least it's mopping up anything that wasn't getting into the fresh market or into export. But there is a challenge there that comes in. A lot of the SMEs or the CPGs, the companies that are out here today, they are creating products that aren't having anything vegetable or fruit inside it. So you're finding a lot of additions into the product. So I think for me here would be how, as private sector, do we make use of this that would have gone into waste anyway and add it into the products themselves so that they become nutritious. So you're finding a whole lot of produce being fortified with other premixes and not really using the fruit and vegetables that could either give us the recommended daily allowed nutrients that are supposed to be there. So for me, I think there for me is an important part of how can we partner with the private sector who are either processors or microprocessors or small vendors out here in Kenya or in the region, and to buy produce that already would have gone to waste, process it or value add it, and add it into the products that they're making. So I'll give a case scenario. Tomatoes right now, a whole lot of tomato paste that is being eaten in Kenya, either is just, starch, salt, water, and sugar, and color, and there is nothing like a tomato in it. Or it is produce from Egypt or China. So where is that leaving the Kenyan farmer? So I think for me, the question would be, how is it that we can support each other, build Kenya for Kenyans, support our own, to ensure that we eat what we produce, that is done correctly, because I think there's an emphasis on this to the farmer, on using the right pesticides and doing the right agronomical practices, so that they have a market that the processor can use, and even us as consumers can say, okay, this particular product is using a whole 60% of tomato paste or 60% of mango pulp. I will buy this because it has nutrients and it is sourcing from my Kenyan farmers. So I think for me, it's also a call to action for the private sector. We have gone off the road and are now using technology to create products. Can we please just go back to our roots and eat normal vegetables and fruits?
Let me come to Chris. Now, food loss, food wastage, and sustainable agriculture systems, sustainable agri-systems. But even while at that, while we can process mangoes, we can process tomatoes, I'm being asked to ask the panel here, because you're stars in this area. How do we process, say, I have lots of tomatoes, I don't eat crisps. How do we say that? Can we process this into another product aside from chips and crisps? How do right now we have shortage of onions in the country. When we have surplus, how do we save these products? How do we make sure that we get onion powder from onions? And in that same conversation, how do we have sustainable agriculture systems? We avoid loss and wastage.
Thank you. A good question as well. Let me begin by saying this, that it's possible and we should be able to process for purposes of preserving what we have. But having said that, I want to add another dimension, that food loss and waste is gaining an extra definition in terms of sustainability. That it's not just what you don't eat, which you are supposed to eat, but even the unedible part, which was produced using land, water, energy sources, and was not supposed to be eaten. That material, which is not extractable as food, but has been produced using these resources, becomes waste in some definition. Now, what that means is then we have to adopt a processing mechanism that tries to circulate everything back into the system. What I mean by that is, if you have, for example, what can I say, banana, for example, you get your starchy fruit, you have the peels. These peels could be converted into animal feed. They could be, they could enter another destination where you do anaerobic, fermentation, convert it into compost, return it back to the soil, or even generate energy, biogas out of it. This is the whole, feeling or the whole thinking about sustainability, that anything that you produce should not go to waste. You should create value out of it and take it back to regenerate that particular source of agricultural production. And that is where we are heading to deal with issues of climate change, environment, and again also to fit within national development programs, where, for example, in Kenya we are talking of creating jobs, getting employment opportunities, incomes for the young people.
Now, Nekesa, he's talking about the circular economies when it comes to food. Comes from the ground up, and I know there's even a farm in Kisii that uses the banana refuse to produce sanitary towels. This is an entire system of making sure that it is not just about the food, but what else can we get out of it. But as we talk about all this, the question could be, I have mangoes. Infrastructure to get these to the market is difficult for me. I'll try to sell to my local people who can buy it. The rest that is not there, I'll give it to my animals to eat. That which remains, God save us all. So how do we then make sure that we engage in sensitizing the farmer, sensitizing the locals, and also just pushing the government as they need, so that nothing goes to waste? Because where we are right now, it is 4 decades without proper rain. Moving forward, it's getting worse because climate change is here with us. So how do we make sure the government is doing the right thing, the locals do the right thing, the private sector is doing the right thing, and even the technology sector come in to help in addressing such problems?
Thank you for that question. And you've touched something that is very close to my heart when you say technology, because we have a lot of innovations, a lot of technologies that can actually help us save, prevent food loss. So I was just looking at what our forefathers used to do, especially when it comes to vegetables. There was something called fermentation, where we would put, the traditional vegetables in a cooking pot and keep adding milk. That was a way of preserving. So nothing actually went to loss when it came to vegetables during the high season and all that, because you could keep it for a very long period. There's something called also drying, which God has provided us with, solar. We have free solar, which you don't have to pay for. You can actually dry some of these vegetables. And some of these technologies, farmers can do at that level, at their household level. So if we can increase some of these technologies at the farmer level to be able to absorb the food that is being produced in excess, I believe that we can sort out the issue of food security in-house and also food security at the country. If we tie it to what my brother here is doing, Mr. Nyoro, I think it can be a perfect situation where you're bringing, can you imagine having dried vegetables across the country where the farmer has their own for, that period where they lack. And then the excess, they are driving through the food bank. One thing is for sure, there's no bulkiness in transporting that vegetable. It's been reduced to, 10 times less the size. So even transportation is even better. It can be ground into powders where children can eat in their foods. It can be taken to, Isiolo, Dadaab, all those places where there's no food. There's other methods of even, preservation, pickling. We have canning. You've talked about onions. When there's plenty of onions, what do we do with them? You can dry them, ground them into powder, store them for future use, or even pickle them. There's a lot of ways in which we can do this, and all this is about awareness. So if the government, we are landing everything on the government, but the Ministry of Agriculture maybe training maybe some few young people. We have a lot of graduates who can be trained. And I'll take the case of Ethiopia, where they're using graduates at the village level. So when you have a graduate in the village, that agricultural graduate is used to deliver information about agriculture. What are we doing here? We're even chasing our graduates from agriculture. So I think it's time that the ministry utilized our graduates at that village level to deploy some of these technologies so that we can be able to get out of these problems that we're having currently.
Moses, she's talking about technology. I'll give you a scenario. There's a page that I follow on YouTube. Hi guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we are learning how to pickle. And you see, pickling is something that has been there since time immemorial. Americans do it really, really well. And people in their kitchen gardens, they go take what they have excess, they pickle it for rainy days to come. You know, these are guys who, they learned how to pickle because when it's winter, nothing grows. So they have to plan for that. Now here is a question where we talk about providing food, growing food in excess, but we never address the issue of where does it go after we have it all. So who should be responsible, essentially, when it comes to loss and wastage?
I think food loss and waste, and again, that's a very good question, is a very big issue. Because it's not only in Kenya where you have food loss and waste. It's all over. We were in Mexico recently. They produce a lot of food, but they're still losing food. Kenya being an agrarian economy, you find that issues of food loss, particularly in agriculture, are very big for this country. Because actually, most people should actually be employed by that particular sector. Because we are not really industrially advanced. However, I believe that everyone should be involved in this particular process of salvaging food that can actually go into loss. The government, the private sector, NGOs like us, we should all be involved in salvaging food. And one of the things we are doing at the moment, for instance, as an intervention, is what Nekesa was saying just now, use of solar dehydrators to actually dry vegetables in areas where they get surplus. You know, when you have surplus vegetables, we dry them and increase the shelf life by more than 1 year. And then because you suck most of the moisture, the storage is even very easy. You don't have issues storing those vegetables. And if we can have more of such technology used in order to actually extend the shelf life of food, then in that particular case, you'll find that food sustainability, food security will be enhanced in a much easier way. Because then it's not a situation where you have bumper harvest and then you have shortages in other times, and most of the food that was actually harvested when it was a bumper harvest was lost. So it doesn't make sense. It's like the way we were talking about the problem of flooding, that we need to prepare for heavy rains so that instead of that water coming to damage, it is actually directed to a reservoir where it can then be used later during the dry season, and especially when we notice that climate has actually been very erratic in the last few years because of global warming. So that means that we have to come into these interactions. In every area, whatever people are growing, what can you do in this particular area? What technology can we bring in? And that requires research. So that in every area we are saying that if we use this particular approach, then we can actually make sure that we are extending the shelf life of the food and it doesn't go to loss. As I said, there's a lot of food that goes to loss because processing industries are not as many in Kenya. And there's something Caroline said which is very interesting, making sure that we are using that same food that we are growing to actually make whatever is processed instead of using technology to bring in other things, and therefore leading to more loss of food. I think that was a very good point that she was raising there.
And I'll come to you, Caroline. Moses says bumper harvest, I'll add bumper losses. It is a fact. Kinangop, the tomatoes and all that. Now, what is my role as an individual? Because let's now talk to an individual person when it comes to dealing with matters, food loss and wastage. But even at that, I don't know, all of you, I want you to tell me, say County A produces a lot of this product, County B has deficiency of this product, but needs the product in County A. Is it about time that even our county governments and the government looks at how they can do trade among these counties? Like, we don't have these, sell to us. We have these, and we will facilitate movement of this product.
Yeah, that's a good question. So first, the government is addressing that issue. Currently, it's setting up, I think, first 17 processing hubs per county. And it's to target whatever is being produced highest in that county is what they are able to process and maybe now share among the different counties. But to talk to a question about the consumer, I think for me is also a question about taste profiles. we have a very strong palate, I think, Kenyans and East Africans. We are so strong on maize and not willing to move to other
sorghum.
Yes, because like West Africa, you will find them eating, what do you call it? Fufu is cassava and the rest. And they don't rely on maize at all.
They eat cow skin.
Yes, they will eat cow skin. So our palate needs to change in a way that allows us to go with what is in the times. So what am I trying to say? Even if we value added a product, let's say leafy greens. So they're in season when it rains, there are so many of them. When they are not in season, we are struggling to get vegetables. So if we were able to dry it, I know recently we use a human-centered design approach to get consumer insights on a particular product. They were very hesitant on dried vegetables. And so if that powdered vegetable was added into chapati, and you had kienyeji chapati, would you eat it?
Chapati managu.
Chapati managu. And so would you eat it? And so for us, it's the question of that vegetable has to go somewhere. Yes, the powder, you won't be able to cook it the way you know how to cook your skuma wiki, but you could eat it in a chapati, or you could take it in a porridge. It still brings you the required, what do you call it, RDAs, the required recommended daily nutrients that you require. So for me, the question is our palate, how do we change it? So I think the call to action there as consumers first is how do we accept what is being changed? Because you can dry onions, but will people use them? I know there are so many companies who are doing it, but will people use them? So I think it's also a change, a shift. The same way we accepted that there are mobile phones, there is Uber today, we need to have that change and shift in mind that onions and vegetables don't have to be whole for you to eat them, but we should be able to adopt to a value-added product to be used when we are in scarcity of this produce. And I think the last call there for also consumers is imagine this, there is a glut. So if you don't want to eat it in a managu chapati, there is, let's say, around 300 metric tons that is lost of, let's say, mango in particular months between December and end of February. So currently, if we are producing 800 metric tons, 500 metric tons is getting a market. So I think the other question is how do we get that over 300,000 metric tons that is getting wasted into our mouths as a whole fruit because people don't want value added. So it means when you multiply, it takes 3 mangoes to make a kilo. So when you multiply that times the number of tonnage, it comes to, I think, it was around 750 million pieces of mango that go to waste. So if you divide by 50 million Kenyans, it is a very tangible number of 17 pieces between the month of December and February, where we need to add, if before you are eating 3, now add 17 pieces in that month. And in that period. And to make it a very tangible number, it's divided by those 3 months that we produce that. So that is 6 pieces. 6 pieces. If before you are eating 3 pieces of mango in December, please add another 6 more pieces, and that's per person, not the household, per person, and that makes it very tangible, social math, on how we can reduce loss. If before you were eating tangerines from, sorry, Tanzanian brothers, from Tanzania or South Africa, let's try as much as possible to eat that we produce at that time in a glut, so that we, what do you call it, reduce the losses.
So now let me come to you, Christopher. While you're adding on that, I want you to also tell me what to expect as we commemorate the International Day tomorrow. What should we expect? Yes.
Yeah. So before I respond to that, I want to add that it's time even consumers changed their habits, their social behavior, because haven't you gone to parties, to weddings, and it's self-service? People pile their plate, and they leave, part of it, maybe 70% on the plate, and that has to go to waste. If you go to the supermarket and found that the milk is expiring tomorrow, would you buy it?
I guess logic demands that you buy it so that it's consumed today.
Yes, because if you have milk that's expiring tomorrow in your house, you won't throw away.
Yeah.
So you see, this thinking around even the way we behave is something that we need to create awareness. Perhaps, as somebody was saying the morning, that these are issues that also need perhaps to be pushed to the curriculum so that our children grow knowing that there's something called food waste, food loss, and should not be tolerated. Tomorrow is Friday, Saturday?
Yes, Friday.
Friday. We'll have the Food Loss and Waste Awareness Day at the University of Nairobi. And it will take place in Taifa Hall. We expect, a lot of sensitization to be taking place. We'll have also issues to do with product preparation and how, to demonstrate how a food product can be used appropriately, reused in the kitchen, just to create awareness about the whole subject of food loss and waste. And so everybody is welcome.
Now, Nafula, as we talk about issues to do with changing the attitudes, using tech, and everybody coming on board, yeah? Now it is us at home and making sure that our offsprings, our children, get to know how important it is to use that which you need, not to pile your food as though tomorrow you will not need to eat again, or go to a wedding and carry some for the community that end up being waste again. So how do we just have this conversation and sensitize people to have what they need and be able to preserve what they don't need for later days?
Maybe before I touch on that, I'll also throw in insect protein. Westerners, we are known for eating the termites, the flying termites. There's also the crab, like the dung crab. Yeah. There's so much, crickets. But when you tell people to eat this, they actually can't eat them. But
witchcraft.
True. So we need to change our palates, as I was just supporting what Carol was saying. But above all is to also get you guys in media. Because if you advertise for me, like Blue Band, I'll use Blue Band. But if you advertise for me, sorghum, brown ugali, that's what I'll go for. So it's also effort that we need to do as maybe a partnership or whatever to get media to share more, because children are watching the TV. They watch cartoons in the morning. In between those cartoons, you can throw in an ad about food loss, like just put enough for your plate. But also at the end of the day, it begins with you as a parent. Because if they see you putting a lot of food on your plate and not finishing, they'll do exactly the same. They'll say, Mommy and Daddy does the same. So I think it starts with you as the parent to also teach your children what to eat. I'll give an example. In my household, I call the kids, come and tell me how much you want. And they know if they don't finish their food, they'll have it for breakfast, especially if it's dinner. So they have to put just enough for what they will eat at that time. So I think it's important that you start with there, because food is also not cheap right now. It's very expensive. And as he said, it's a process. There's land, there's water. It's a whole process. And if you're a farmer, you know what it takes to grow like a particular food. I don't think you'd want it to go to waste. Okay. So
let me come to you, Moses. I've just been asked this question. You've invited 10 people to show up. 5 show up. You have plates for 5 people that you don't know where you will take. I mean, in these times where you know you're not going to honor an invite, is it about time that we said, tell me in advance so that I don't spend more, I don't cook more, I don't get to waste food? But even while we are doing that, what are your closing remarks?
Very nice question again. I would like to say this. We should have that mindset where if I have people that I've invited for that particular function and they don't show up, then I should also be knowing my environment. I remember there was this issue of Nyumba Kumi, and we were saying that make sure you know your neighbors. If they don't show up, then I should not throw away that food. I should identify the people I know in my area and in my environment who are actually going to need that food and make sure that I actually take it to them. If we can all be concerned about our neighbors, again, that is something that has been raised here, apart from the fact that, because as somebody rightly said, some people put so much food on one type of food, they are still not getting all the nutrients. All they want is a full tummy. but they don't really have all the nutrients from the food. It's exactly the same thing. If we have a situation where we find that we have excess, then I think it's important that we change our mindsets. As Kenyans and just all over,
yes,
that I should always think in terms of I can support somebody else who probably will not have a chance to get this kind of food. Yeah,
let me come to you, Caroline, because time is not on our side. As we close, what is your message to farmers, the private sector, and the government, and also tomorrow as you observe the day, what is your message to Kenyans?
Thanks. So for me, one is to the farmer, let's produce the right produce with the right pesticides. Food safety has become an issue, and it's important we get the right produce to market. Secondly, to consumers, I say I think we have the power. 50 million mouths to feed, has the power to eat as much as possible at a particular period when there's a glut. And I think for me, that is there's something we say, eat, drink, Kenyan. Whether it's mango, tomato, or indigenous leafy greens. And then for me, I think the third one to government is let's get as much as possible to get more, solutions that are from the universe of the world. There is nothing new, I think, that is likely to happen. So what can we bring in here that can help us elongate shelf life, especially for produce that when there's a glut. Right. And then the last one to private sector, partner with us in Technos. We are innovating using the human-centered design. And so we are looking for partnerships with private sector, especially around processors, to see how we can put more fruit and vegetables into our products, and that will help us get a product into market.
Thank you very much. On set with me is Christopher Mutungi, Nekesa Wafula, Moses Nyoro, Caroline Minor, as we talk about food wastage and how we can avoid that. It is a conversation that definitely needs to continue in this country and the world at large, because climate change is here with us. We cannot afford to let food go into wastage. My name is Dennis Aseto. Tomorrow is International Day of Awareness of Food and Loss and Waste.